on accessibility with Hector Minto. Before I briefly do introductions, I'll just go through some of the accessibility considerations for this session. So closed captions are available. If you just click the CC button, you'll be able to bring them up and have captions of both Hector and myself. There's also the ability to magnify the view in Teams live events, and feel free to ask any questions. So my name's Emma. I'm an experienced designer at Deloitte Digital, and alongside some great colleagues of mine, I lead the inclusive design capability at Deloitte. I'm really looking forward to this session and hearing from Hector. So Hector, for anyone who is not already aware, is a really key figure in the accessibility community. He's been a subject matter expert in accessibility, assistive tech and disability issues for over 20 years and worked in a number of incredible organizations. Previously, he was the co-creator of the Learning Curve for Eyegaze technology, which is a tool to help children and adults embrace technology despite complex physical, cognitive, and emotional disabilities. And now Hector works at Microsoft, who are by far the world leaders in inclusive design and accessibility. They've been on that journey for a long time. So Hector, thanks so much for making some time today. Really looking forward to hearing from you. How are you doing today?
Yeah, thanks, Emma. Yeah, great to join you today. And thanks for such a nice intro. Yeah, I'm looking forward to a discussion about both aspects of accessibility, you know, this concept of inclusive design, but then also the fundamentals of building accessible tech. So yeah, great to be here.
Awesome. Brilliant. And Hector, did you want to share with us how, I'm interested to know how did you get into this space and become so passionate about accessibility? What's your story from your perspective?
Yeah, so I always warn people before they get too much into this topic that it is addictive. I mean, you know, once you realize just how exciting this space is, both from an innovation lens, but also just that human inclusion lens, it's really kind of difficult to let go. My earliest experiences with disability were really with my mum. She's a special ed, adult ed teacher, or she was. And as a teenager, I was dragged kicking and screaming in to support some of the adult ed classes she was using. And really realized from an early date that there was this really fascinating community that nobody was really talking about, and you know, we were excluded from my education. But actually, when you get in and you meet people and make friends within the disability community, you realize actually there's this whole different world out there, people excluded. And once you're in, you're in. From that moment forward, honestly, I always had a kind of an itch scratching to get back in and work in this space. So after I completed my degree in the 90s, I joined a series of amazing UK mainly assistive technology companies. Some of the first tech that I ever used was you know, wouldn't have looked out of place in a Wallace and Gromit cartoon. I mean, you know, to turn newspaper pages, we were using vacuum pumps and switches and springs and car aerials, and this was long before we ever really even imagined people would have access to tech, you know, computer tech. Nobody was really having that conversation at that point, but that's really where I earned my spurs, essentially, getting out there, really working at the coalface with people with disabilities, making individual solutions for them in terms of their physical access to newspapers. And here I am 20 years later, you know, really what I feel is at the cutting edge of modern tech, starting with inclusive design at Microsoft.
Brilliant. Awesome. So
how about you? What was your earliest experience?
So a few years ago, I worked with an incredible client of ours whose customer base are exclusively people who have disabilities. And so during that time, I was completely immersed in the world of inclusive design, accessibility, and I conducted a lot of research with user research with people who have disabilities. And I think it just became very clear to me how inaccessible the digital world is to so many people. And I really previously had no idea. And a switch kind of flicked, I think, and I just thought that, you know, I'm in a position as a product designer to focus on this and make a difference, and became immensely passionate about it, and I've been advocating for it since then. So I think similar to you, it's kind of an addictive topic, and yeah, I just love working in this space and using design for good, really.
So do you want me to just kick off with some of the kind of the fundamentals that we talk about inside Microsoft? Because I think that's, you know, when people ask me what my job is, you know, I'm not writing code. You know, I'm not designing websites. A lot of the work that I'm doing is working with people with disabilities, both externally in our customer base at Microsoft and in community organizations, within disabled people's organizations. But then I'm also working with our technicians and digital teams around the world, getting them to understand why this is important, and actually just some of the core principles they have to have in place before they can even get started on their journey. And one kind of level set that we really lock onto inside Microsoft is this: the World Health Organization's redefinition of disability. This disability is not a personal health condition, but it's actually a mismatch in human interaction, and that puts the focus on the design. Yeah, in that all of us become disabled by design at some point, right? It's nothing to do with our medical condition. It's to do with just like, you know, we can't do this the way that this has been designed, and you're asking us to use it. And when we get technologists in particular to recognize this definition, honestly, you get a lot of uptake into the actual design challenge. Human beings like to be challenged. Human beings like to solve problems. And actually, what we quite often find is that our colleagues and teams with disabilities quite often already have a lot of those problem-solving skills because they've had a lifetime of hacking around making things work for them. So it's this moving the conversation beyond compliance. You know, lots of regulations out there about digital inclusion and accessibility, but actually just inspiring people to kind of, you know, join our journey to build tech that works for more people. Another fundamental we really are axing on right now, I would say, inside Microsoft, is that tech reaches further than ever before. Jobs that in the past would never have been digital experiences are increasingly so. So that includes construction, retail, even down to service industries, you know, cleaning and catering. People are expected to use technology in some way, shape or form. And not just the workplace. You know, you can't be an included citizen in modern society without having some basic digital skills and access to technology. So the other thing we're getting across is this trend, I would say, this mega trend, that technology used to be designed for a very specific set of people with some digital skills. Now we're designing technology for all human beings. So we really like to make sure that people understand some of those fundamentals. That doesn't mean that we move away from the regulatory picture. You know, we support governments making strong regulation on accessibility, because it's not just us that are involved in this, it's the whole tech sector. So we make sure that people understand this balance between the design challenge and the compliance. And that's just not the external compliance. I mean, obviously within a company the size of Microsoft, we have our own standards that we build technology to. And so we're always making sure that people understand that we are, within my team at Microsoft, we are both carrot and stick. We want to offer up the excitement of designing tech that works for everyone with a brand new set of tools, but we also want to make sure that they recognize the legal obligations we have and the risk we have in not designing technology that works for more people. And so I'm really pleased to see, especially in the UK, some of the evolution of the regulations beyond a website. So the new regs in the UK make sure that actually, if you're delivering anything to the public sector, that your website is accessible, your apps, people are writing apps, are accessible, but also you're delivering documents in a really accessible way as well. So we make sure that we cover both bases, and that's actually really the fundamentals of this talk today, right, Emma? You know, we want to make sure that we show the delight and the opportunity of inclusive design, but make sure people understand the nuts and bolts of accessibility.
Yeah, I would completely agree. I think they absolutely have to go hand in hand. I think someone can have the understanding of the nuts and bolts and the skills, but if they don't have that awareness of the bigger picture and the passion, I think, you know, people get busy and might fall through the cracks. But you know, on the other hand, people might have the passion to do this, but if they don't have those hands-on skills in practically how do you build an accessible product, then that it's equally difficult. So no, completely agree.
And actually, I spend a lot of my time convincing the people who are totally locked on the regulations to become better inclusive designers, and I talk to people who are really obsessed with inclusive design to make sure they're not missing the basics.
Yes.
So you know, I think that's just the maturity of the topic, isn't it? Right? You know, it's heightened now in the tech world compared to where we were on this 10 years ago.
Yeah.
So one of the things that people might not be aware of actually is, you know, there is the kind of the nuts and bolts of accessibility, but actually AI has really been a spur for this reinvestment within accessibility. We had our Ability Summit a couple of weeks ago, and Satya Nadella was actually saying this, that when he thinks about accessibility, he just thinks about AI all the time, because you know, if technology can increasingly, to some level, see, hear, process, then actually there's a real opportunity, a sort of sweet spot of innovation that we can really go after, where we're getting tech to carry some of that load in the lives of people with disabilities. And actually, we fundamentally believe that the people with disabilities, with that lived experience, learning about what AI can do, should be at the forefront of making, you know, those you know, getting those amazing innovations out there. So just as a kind of an overarching theme to this session, you know, revisit the tech we have today. I mean, if you just look at the captions we have available to us now, right? You know, I'm in PowerPoint here. At any point now, I can just flick on amazing quality captions into any meeting. This is only possible because we've got AI working on the voice model and working on the vocabulary within my presentation in real time. You know, if it isn't delivering it to this quality in terms of accuracy, people switch off and just say, nah, we're not ready for this yet. The world's not ready. So it's only by leveraging AI that we're getting stuff down to this quality, but that empowers people to kind of go again at accessibility because the toolkit's changing. I'll turn that off so we're not distracting viewers from seeing two sets of captions. Remember, you can turn these on in the Teams viewer. I did want to quickly move us on to the core principles, Emma. You know, this is really these nuts and bolts, and again, we've got to make sure people understand what these principles of accessibility are. So I'll put a very wordy page up here on the screen. So we've got perceivable. Is the technology and the UI design that people are being asked to interface with, you know, is it presented in a way that they can perceive and is not invisible to some senses? So we've got to make sure that a website or any UI presents itself to the user. It must be operable, and generally we talk a lot in this space about navigation. You know, you've got to be able to navigate it in an intelligible way. Understandable. Is the information conveyed to people in a way that's understandable to them? And robust means, does it have staying power? You know, does the UI that you're building, can you use it with a load of different types of assistive technology, voice control, screen readers for people who are blind, magnification, and as assistive technology develops, does it maintain its accessibility because of the way that it has been designed? You talk about these as well, Emma, when you're running your design sprints?
Yes, absolutely. And I think that it's really critical to think about these different buckets because, and I mean, something that I sometimes think about with accessibility is that it's almost misleading in some ways in how it talks about access. But I think these buckets really highlight that it's about so much more than just access. And I think, you know, something can be perceivable, but that doesn't mean that someone can equally understand or contribute or participate in that experience, if it's digital, if it's physical. So I think these are really crucial to understand, that someone can operate and understand and contribute to that. And so all of these buckets are essential in bringing that together.
And some of those elements come out within the training of these. So what I would say is that we meet a lot of people, and you know, they don't really understand that images have to be labeled for people who are blind, right? We're seeing this all the time on social media. People are throwing memes out, right? Images, but they have to be reminded. In the UI of something like Twitter or LinkedIn, they have to be reminded now. Actually, if you want that information to reach more people, you're going to have to add the description in there. AI is doing some of that work now, but it's never going to be giving the accurate human description that you want to convey in the image that you're sending over. So a few of these nuggets: how to do captions, how to do alt text, how to think about things like color contrast. You need to be really specific about it. Don't assume that people know that these are the issues. I think we're going to talk about this a little bit later, but the signposting of this is really critical.
Microsoft is doing some really interesting work in signposting. I think you've recently released some great new features in some of your products.
It's signposting, actually, I think, honestly, and I'm not the only. It's not everybody that agrees with me in Microsoft, so this is not like official line or anything. But actually, I think signposting is probably the biggest investment we need to make. There are features inside a Windows environment, right, that people that have been there since Windows 95. And people still don't know they're there, right? So typing one-handed on a keyboard, you hit your right shift key 5 times and it immediately starts one-handed typing, which from an inclusive design perspective means that you can, hold your kid while continuing to type an email, right? But at the same time means that somebody who has one limb is also able to type one-handed on a device with latching keys. Now we can put that technology in all you like, but still to this day, I will go to events and I will meet somebody who's lost a limb and they still don't know that that's available and they've been using a technology for 10 years, right? So it's not enough to just make it accessible. There's work that we need to do as an industry. And I think this is actually where we can really play the part the most, actually, to make sure that people understand that there are different ways that people use technology and that it's a completely normal experience and it's all built in, but people need to be signposted to it. I always say, I ran a little campaign in the last election with UK MPs, just sort of saying, no caption, no vote. Okay, I was just like, hang on a minute, you're reaching us all digitally, you're putting loads of video out there, but you're not captioning it. So how do you expect people to get that information? And you're breaking your own laws that you've put in, right? Yeah. And it was a really interesting experiment because there were some that, many who came to me and just like, Hector, I did not even know this was a thing. Show me how to do it. And there were others that just completely ignored me, right? And I know which ones I think are probably the more progressive, politicians, right? so what I generally find with this information is there's 2 groups of people. There's people who just don't think it's their issue, but actually there's a really significantly growing number of people who, when they see that you can be digitally accessible, they will be. And so signposting, I think, is a really important part. Yeah,
agreed. Absolutely.
So I really want you to explain how you think about inclusive design. We have our own landing page here for inclusive design, but you're doing this on a daily basis. How do you kick off explaining what inclusive design is?
Yeah, so I think the definitions of accessibility and inclusive design sometimes kind of depend on who you ask, and they are extremely tightly coupled. And I think you can't really have one successfully without the other. So how I see accessibility is that's kind of, the mechanics or the nuts and bolts of how you create an accessible experience. And web accessibility is quite often defined as, removing barriers for specifically people with disabilities on the web. I think inclusive design is, to me, more of a process or a mindset that involves designing with the full breadth of human diversity. So co-designing with people who are ideally as different as possible to yourself, bringing them on the design journey, and ideally, having as diverse a team as you possibly can. Failing that, co-designing and placing a huge emphasis on research and the diversity of your research, but really, in my mind, it's just co-designing in whichever way that you can and having as diverse teams as possible, really. And sometimes I prefer to use inclusive design. I think, as I said earlier, sometimes I think, the access aspect of accessibility can be a little bit misleading. And sometimes I think it's it has a little bit of a bad rap in some digital product processes as a checkbox activity, which is really, we're trying to shift the conversation, further than that, and that's not what accessibility is about. It's making products kind of inclusive to everyone. So I can't split between the two, but that's how I see inclusive design.
And you used a really important word there, which is with, right? And actually, I think one of the supports that we need to, one of the real fundamentals here is this with thing. This is not about, oh yeah, I'm thinking about blind people now. It's actually going out and meeting the people who will use your product and involving them in the design. And what we're finding interesting at Microsoft is, we're deliberately going after people with disabilities with the skills to join our team to actually come in and work inside Microsoft on these projects. Yeah, there's nothing beats real human experience. The only thing I would say about another one of those fundamentals that we're trying to that we educate people on is that 70% of disability is hidden. There are already people with disabilities in most organizations, but the culture might be wrong in terms of people sharing their disability and being open about their disability. When we can get culture right, so there's, it's seen as a strength that we need within our organizations to be able to fully represent society, then you get more representation, and that representation starts to feed into your product design, because you've got this group, of richly kind of, or experienced people who face the design challenges that you're trying to crack within your midst. And it's amazing to me how many organizations are finding this now, when they just go and ask that simple question, who do we have already within our organization who has this lived experience? Really important. I mean, we used to go out to consultation all the time, and we still do. We work with a lot of disabled people's organizations and a lot of trusted tester programs in the US and things where we're making sure that people with disabilities are testing our device. But when we look at things like our hackathons and our design challenges with competitions within Microsoft, the disability community are seen as who all have employee resource groups and things set up to be able to kind of share experience of what it's like to work at Microsoft. These groups are actively engaged into design, into project teams, brought into project teams and into design challenges.
Yeah.
So yeah, really, really important word that.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't think anybody with a disability, involved in design would have designed this one on the left, Emma, right?
No, exactly. Like this is sometimes how I see what happens if you think about accessibility without inclusive design more broadly. So I think the example on the left is technically accessible, but I think if you speak to a lot of people who use a wheelchair, they wouldn't find that a very inclusive experience, because to enter that building you have to break away from potentially someone you're having a conversation with, and you have a separate entrance. But if you have, and now I think the image on the right, I can't confirm from a distance if this is actually an accessible elevation, but the idea is that if from the outset you include people with disabilities and different perspectives, they might challenge you to say, well, why is this not one inclusive experience that everyone can use together? So you might come up with a really beautiful solution that is not simply focused on giving access. And I think so curb cuts doesn't seem like the most exciting example, but I think inclusive design is a huge advantage and catalyst for innovation. For hundreds of years, designers in the physical world have been innovating as a result of designing for disabilities. So I think one of the earliest typewriters was designed for someone who was blind, curb cuts, vegetable peelers. And these, I think what's really critical about these is that they really improve the experience for all users. And I think that's always the case for inclusive design, that interventions like this inevitably improve the experience for everyone. I mean, everyone's benefited from curb cuts who has, you might have a pram, luggage, various other scenarios that, this enables. And that was kind of all spurred from inclusive thinking.
We were joking about this earlier, though, when we were just before we came on air, about they've now kind of extended this in terms of city planning to create these beautiful open spaces where you almost like have no curbs. But I guarantee you, in many of those circumstances, they didn't engage with with people with disabilities, because there's actually something really nice in terms of navigation to have sidewalks and pavements and curbs. When you have completely open spaces where everyone has open access to the space, the cars, the bikes, the people, the skateboards, it really becomes a really unpleasant experience for people with disabilities. So people take a basic design like a curb cut and low profile, and they take that design challenge even further. But because they leave people with disabilities out in the next extension of the design, they actually end up getting it wrong again. So you kind of sometimes, even when you think you're getting it right, you're getting it wrong because you don't have that real user voice, right?
Yeah,
we were going to show a digital equivalent of the curb cut, and this is really just an example where people with disabilities are often also the spur for the design idea. So within PowerPoint now, we use artificial intelligence to create beautiful looking slides. And honestly, I see there's a few templates that are used in here, certainly with our automated icons and things. I see these images on Twitter all the time, right? So people are using the automated design generator within PowerPoint all the time now, but I guarantee you very few people know that it came from people with physical disabilities, working with our teams, our office team, with PowerPoint, and explaining in kind of hacks and things that it takes them way too long to create good looking content. At this point, actually, the blind community within Microsoft chipped in as well, and we're like, yep, we don't ever create great looking content because we don't really have a good way of doing it. It's not very well described. Now what we do is we use AI, where you put your photo in, if you're choosing a photo, and then you put your text in, and it uses artificial intelligence to auto-generate beautiful looking slides with the images, with the images centered, with faces centered in the photos, with good color palettes that match the detail in the photo in the initial designs, right? So, it's a really nice feature, but it really supports people with disabilities in a seamless way. And it's just again maybe a more digital. When people are getting bored of telling people about curb cuts, tell people about PowerPoint design ideas. It's the same idea. We've cracked a challenge, but starting with a lens of disability, which leading to delightful experiences for everybody. So I just want to shift the conversation on, if we can, because I guess you're having to kind of convince people that running inclusive design projects is worthwhile, right? And we have to convince our engineering teams and our customers, actually, as we go out and sell technology that is inclusive, that there's a really good rationale for doing it. And so there's a few numbers here that I think support this argument. But I always say to people, there's a great values case for having a great ethical code, having values that sort of say, look, you want to be inclusive, and that, don't walk away from that. That really resonates with a lot of people. Lots of people will do the right thing if given the option. But also there is a really important business case for people with disabilities, in that there are over 1 billion people on the planet with a disability, and that tech particularly is reaching further than ever before. If we think about the global reach of tech nowadays, the buying power of people with disabilities is over 6.9 trillion. Actually, I saw that number go up a little bit recently, $6.9 trillion. And actually, in terms of an often unthought of business case, when we think about the recruitment challenges of most organizations to bring talent into their organizations, if you're not recruiting people with disabilities, you're missing out on a heck of a lot of talent out there. Yeah, and diversity within your organizations. We know that organizations around the world that really put a focus on diversity, and particularly disability diversity, are actually leading to better economic performance, or better business performance. So there's these two things that I just think you don't ever say one is more important than the other, but you should always raise both whenever you're trying to convince people to invest in accessibility. Yeah,
absolutely. I think there's certainly different kind of levers you can pull depending on who you need to convince of the cause. I think another that we talk a lot about in delivering digital products is the cost of retrofitting and not embedding it in from the outset. And I think you know, the impact if you don't consider accessibility until a certain point in delivering a product, your effort and your cost is going to skyrocket, because if you embed it from the beginning, it's actually, there's so much you can do and kind of set and forget in a way, have accessible style guides and content up front that makes the rest of your delivery journey a lot easier. So I think that can be quite an effective argument as well.
And ugly bolt-ons and options for disability afterwards never look great.
That is what will break the UI, not embedding accessibility from the beginning. But yeah, absolutely.
So getting people on side, you know, Emma, you talked about pulling levers. Yeah, I think that's a really important thing. Some of our learning on this, and we touched on this at the start, but when I'm thinking about building muscle on this topic, both within customers that I engage with, but also in terms of internally, you know, a lot of the work I'm doing, remember, is moving around different European offices, meeting teams and getting them to kind of dig into this cultural phenomenon that we're getting going inside Microsoft and beyond. But I essentially have these three tools in my toolkit. Compliance, you know, lots of people respond to the compliance argument, and they need to understand what the compliance asks of them are. So we're talking WCAG, we're talking EN 301549 for European procurement, we're talking VPATs and Section 508 in the US. So people need to know what these regulatory tools are, and they need to know the internal ones that we're using and where to find the information. So these are really important things. But then there's also readiness, and readiness to us is education and learning. So we have a badge available internally. We just released it a couple of weeks ago for others to take as well. But essentially, we throw out voluntary optional training for people to take, so that they can get that skill, and then they can show others that they've got that skill and learnt about the topic of disability inclusion and digital accessibility. And then there's also this engagement, customer engagement thing. We now know that people are buying Microsoft technology because it's accessible. Yeah, we know it. Okay, you know, we monitor that inside Microsoft, and that's really important because anybody designing a product wants it to be commercially successful. So as we build these three pillars, we go at it. You know, we've got some various things that we really encourage teams to do, to really understand that being close to the communities you're working with and the solutions you're being challenged with, proximity drives real empathy. Nothing beats designing with. I think you've already explained this brilliantly. Some examples that I think show this really. One example that shows this really nicely is the captioning within Teams. So let me just say, there is no compliance required to deliver captions in digital communication software. There's no law that says we have to do it yet. I'm absolutely sure that will come one day. But you do want your tool you do want to realize that people have this need. So there's a couple of features within Teams that we use. We've got the blurred background, which really supports lip reading and came from Sweta, who's in this video, coming up with the idea of delivering great blurred background to help lip reading. But then there's also the ability to turn on personal caption view. So again, if we had the option to just turn on captions for everybody in a meeting and everybody got to see them, we wouldn't have any. If we just designed it like that, it wouldn't take into account that many people with hearing loss, particularly in the workplace, are not ready to disclose or share that they're losing their hearing. So the design of Teams looked at compliance, as in, you know, well, we think this is going to be on the cards soon. We got really close to the deaf community within Microsoft, so that's what I would call the readiness angle. You know, you learn that this is a need, and you feel that you want to deliver on it. And then there's the engagement. Actually, we now go out and sell Teams because of these captions, but when we sell Teams because of these captions, we make sure that people understand the true empathetic design of the captions, in that it's not up to everybody else to turn the captions on. The individual gets that personal choice because that is a deeply personal choice. And when people see that full story from start to finish, yeah, they realize that we're properly invested in this topic and that we actually really do care about inclusion and accessibility and that it's real and that drives real business results. I have to say, you know, we know this. And
Hector, sorry, just to jump in here, how is it that you do measure and share those positive impacts of these accessibility?
Sure. So yeah, so we know how many people are using features. So, you know, anonymized telemetry globally on features, you know, we know how many people are using the features and we get to see the growth. Okay, so, you know, we know that in a world where as people use technology, one of the most important things for any kind of subscription model for tech is that people are actually using your tools, right? You know, if people are using and relying on the tools that you use, they will continue to subscribe to your product. That's not a big secret, right? You know, that's what we, you know, actual usage of your product is incredibly important. So we make sure that we're measuring that. So for instance, and this is maybe really current for you, Emma, in the COVID crisis, we're looking at, I can't give you a number today, but huge numbers of more people are using the captioning compared to who were before. You know, everybody's talking about Teams usage has gone out X% more, huge, like I think it's 5 times more people are using Teams than there were before. But the captioning has increased way beyond that. Yeah. So as we measure that, we know that that's being used because it's using our cognitive services to deliver that. You know, we get to measure that usage, and that lets us know that these features are being successful. But the other thing that we do is we make sure that when our sales teams, essentially our account teams, are working globally, they're deliberately driving conversations around digital inclusion, accessibility, and they're measuring the customers where this is resonating and actually leading to increased business. Okay, yeah. So we don't make any bones about it. We don't try and hide this. In the modern world, building inclusive technologies and inclusive solutions is commercially a good idea. Okay. Yeah. I'm not sharing playbooks or details with you today.
All right, that's great,
but I think it's the general message that's important, that, you know, either through regulations, which are increasingly gaining more power in terms of specifically around the public sector buying technology that is inclusive, you're also just seeing this desire to drive culture change in companies around the world, have more diversity, and therefore the technology must be more routinely accessible.
Great.
So, testing. Again, I almost want you to kick this off. You know, testing for accessibility is, you know, it's a bugbear to a lot of people, right? You know, it feels like it's as you talked about earlier, a checklist, a tick list. Because of that, there are loads of automated testing tools out for accessibility, and they do a great job. But I think it again brings it back to this topic of width. You only know if something's really accessible, right? If you've really gone and tested its usability with someone. You do a lot of this.
Yeah, I would agree. I think that there's absolutely a place for both automated and human testing of accessibility. I think for me that sometimes I think people go down the route of using automated tools alone and feel that's enough, and they are so critical. But to me, for example, a screen reader experience is still an experience that needs to be designed and needs to be tested by a human at the end of the delivery process. So really it should be, in my view, the experience designer who kind of, when they do their UX and UI check to make sure that the development aligns to the designs, you would also then use a screen reader to go through and understand that if it is making sense on some level from an audio perspective, but then also you need to be testing it with those users who are using screen readers day in, day out. So I think that first gateway is that the designer can go through and make sure, is this working through the experience in a logical way? Is it breaking anywhere? And then after that point, taking it to users who use screen readers to make sure that it makes sense to them as well, and that it's an optimal experience. So I think the human element is really, really important, but also I think there's some key aspects of these automated tools that are really powerful as well, that maybe you can talk more about.
So there's just not enough people in the world to test, or that we know of, right, or that we can reach to actively test everybody's product for them, and there's no way they should be doing that for free either, right? That's a job, right? That's something that people should be paid for. But there's also a lot of people out there who don't really understand how to use a screen reader and how to do some, to use it in a meaningful way to test. So the testing tools are increasingly, well, not increasingly, just generally pretty useful for novices, actually, to get started, to just even get themselves started on their learning journey around accessibility. So we open sourced a couple of years ago, I think it feels like a couple of years ago at least, our internal tools for accessibility testing. We call it Accessibility Insights. It's on GitHub. We can test Android apps, we can test websites and installed Windows applications. So one of the groups that I will tell you, one of the things that we need to do when we are trying to convince people about accessibility is also reach maybe people more senior within an organization to get them to recognize some of the issues they maybe already have. So we will meet marketing directors and let them see their own website with an automated test and let them go away and play with it for free, which is really simple to do with this product, and at least then they have some idea of what they're actually dealing with within their own set. So two things here. It makes it easier for anyone to go and have a look at what we mean by accessibility issues within the product you're building or the website you're using, and two, it widens out this knowledge to a greater number of people. It extends this skill out to a greater number of people. But we must always have good accessibility. So back to this, well, maybe just to bring us back a level, the other thing that I would say that we're learning is that document accessibility, now there are regulations coming on this all around the world, in fact most of them are already here, but all documents must also be accessible. So on the screen here, what you're looking at is a holding slide that we have on every single Microsoft template. Every single thing that we send out centrally from our Microsoft brand center has this holding slide on it, which reminds the author of the deck that they're creating that we have to think about contrast, shape and color, alt text, slide layouts and reading order, and that they have to go and check their final version for accessibility before they provide it externally. So we have our own standards that we're asking people to behave up to, or to work through. But again, you've just got to constantly signpost. You've really got to constantly signpost. So anybody, we can send this out to anybody. You can take it. This is just a really nice concept that every deck you ever create, especially as regulations start to move forward, should just have this holding slide that says, "Don't break the accessibility I created." Yeah. Should we do a quick demo? I think that might be a nice way to move now. One of the things that I actually always recommend, and if somebody says to me, I don't know anything about accessibility, where do I start? And the answer is so simple. It's either on an email or a document. So I'm going to move this out of the slideshow mode and into and I'll zoom a bit as well as we go. All right, so we can you can see what I'm doing, but you'll see up here. Hang on, is our review tab in Office. And when we click on review, we have an option, I didn't click on it. Okay, to check accessibility here. You'll also notice that I put a nice bright yellow cursor on before we started today, just to be inclusive. These are, accessibility is always deliberate. But when we check accessibility, and zoom back out, you can see we have a load of errors on this document. And this is a really good exercise for somebody to go through. Pick a document, run through it, and see where you need to make changes to make this accessible. So alternative text is an obvious one. We go and find a picture. This picture doesn't have any text behind it right now. The fix for that is right in line. So people don't need to go and learn where these settings are to make something accessible. They just click on the little arrow next to the error and it says what we want to do. Do you want to add a description or mark this as decorative? So they click on add a description. At this point, you can ask artificial intelligence to do that for you, but certainly on this, that won't do anything useful. This looks like a circuit board. Actually, that's pretty much what AI probably doesn't think a circuit board looks like. But in here, what you would then do instead is you would type in Microsoft. Notice I've got word prediction working as well. That's on keyboards now in Windows 10. Landing page. And then I would put a link in there too. Oh, it's saving while I'm working. Excuse me a minute.
Hector, while that's saved, something that I've heard along the grapevine is that Microsoft is implementing an editor functionality that reviews your content and highlights any areas of kind of that might demonstrate subconscious bias. Is that something you're...
You have been there. It was in your text. Yeah, absolutely. Can I come back to that in a second? Don't let me forget that. That's a great shout, because inclusion is more than just it is something digitally inclusive. It's a great point. Let me just finish this one. So look, you can add your description, and just as a user now, it's got here, how would you describe this object in its context to someone who's blind? You're starting your learning journey on accessibility. Missing slide titles, you now get the option to edit the slide title or add a hidden slide title. That's all based in here. You'll see here. If we move down, some of the other errors, it's asking us to check some color contrast. Reading order is the tab order, essentially, as you would get on a website as well, within your documents. And then where artificial intelligence has been used to suggest some alternative text, it just reminds you to check it. Yeah, so you can see I can verify this description, and this is not a great description. This is Hector profile photo. So just going through this easy process of checking your own content, something that you're responsible for accessibility, is a really great starting point. Now, the thing you were just talking about was within Word. And when you think about your old-fashioned spell checker and grammar checker, people think, well, okay, checking grammar, that's a pretty straightforward thing. It's got some rules, and we just make sure that we've got one space after a comma, two spaces after a full stop. Or I heard that's old-fashioned now. But now what it will do is it will actually do more. So if I actually pop into Word, we can check documents here. Hang on, you might have to give me a second. I have to put some text in here. So
I did have a look for this myself, but I think it's a beta feature that's still being rolled out.
You should have it. So if I go into my editor here, you may on enterprise versions, you may not have had it deployed yet.
Okay.
And
it's possible I just didn't find it.
It doesn't always kick in, but here can you see here it checks your grammar for clarity, conciseness, formality, but then also inclusiveness. So what it looks there for is gender bias, language, disability bias, age bias. So the AI is starting to kick in to make sure that, and it's not telling you to rewrite it, it's just giving you a little recommendation to give that a go. Just so you know, that's also available in Edge in our browser now. So you can actually get the same grammar checking and spell checking on every web experience as you would inside Word.
Brilliant. That's really exciting.
Should we go back?
Yes. So conscious of time, we have a few minutes left. So
we were going to quickly to cover the topic of social media, and I know that you went.
Yes. So this is another.
So I'm just going to get to your demo. Here we go.
Yeah, okay, thanks. So I actually didn't know that this was a feature that existed in LinkedIn until recently. I think they rolled it out a few months ago and Hector alerted me to it. So on LinkedIn, if you post an image, there is the ability to add alt text. So here, for example, pug in a bee suit, looking, misspelt that, cranky. And I didn't think it would be so professional to actually post this photo on my LinkedIn. So I've jumped out of it. And here, hopefully the audio comes through. You can see Hector's recent post. And this is with the screen reader.
Yeah.
I don't think that audio.
I don't think I shared the audio. So the captions, are what you would be hearing. Yeah.
Yeah. So you can see bottom left, Hector's described that image, and I think it's really crucial to make sure that you really are describing the image in detail and the intention behind the image potentially as well. I think sometimes alt text can be quite limited, and sometimes developers will throw something in there that isn't really truly descriptive of what's in the image. And sometimes images really are quite crucial to a story or a message, or they're the butt of a joke. So alt tags are just, really important. And I think that was a great example of signposting and something everyone can do really easily.
Yeah, I think Twitter and LinkedIn in particular have done a really good job recently to improve that signposting, to make sure it's much easier for people to kind of just discover the option to be inclusive. Yeah. Okay, so I guess we want to just have a bit of a wrap up. I mean, you know, the call to action, I think, for any of these webinars is always just like, even if this is the first time you've even heard about accessibility, or you're re-engaging with it, is, you know, be ambitious and become an innovator in accessibility. You know, start to relish the inclusive design challenge. The challenge of actually creating tech that works for everybody is just a natural human thing to want to do, I think. You had some final comments, Emma.
Yeah, I think for me, this is Cordelia Dillon. She is the accessibility lead. She was at Salesforce. I don't know if she's
still is.
Is she? It's still at Salesforce. Yeah, she. I went to see her speak in Sydney a while back, and she talks about baking and accessibility and thinking of it as, she uses this great analogy of a blueberry muffin and what happens if you try to stuff the blueberries in after the process. It's just you know, it's not going to be a success. So she's also an animator. She's great. So everyone should look her up. But yeah, I think for me, baking it in from the beginning is absolutely crucial, and just makes everyone's lives a lot easier later down the line. So creating accessible content guidelines, style guides, everything up front, and embedding it from the outset in your processes is really critical.
And think beyond just the cost model. And even the delivery of the product. What we're also finding is that when we look at our employee satisfaction inside Microsoft, the fact that accessibility is a cultural pillar within Microsoft and getting so much attention right now is really leading to more people coming out and talking about their disabilities, because, as I say, lots of disabilities hidden in most organizations, but also people are proud to work for Microsoft because we're so invested in this topic and it's real. So you know, there's so many other benefits to investing in this topic. So thanks for joining us today. There is some training available. We have a training course now available on MS Learn, aka.ms/accessibility fundamentals. Get your badge, tag me on LinkedIn, let me know that you got it. And we also have the landing page for inclusive design from Microsoft's version, aka.ms/inclusive design. Any of the features that you want to look at to support your use of technology or your colleagues' use of technology, all of our monthly, it feels like sometimes, updates on accessibility features are available at this way, aka.ms/accfeatures. All of those sites are clearly accessible. Thanks so much.
Yeah, thanks so much, Hector. That was brilliant to hear from you. I think everyone's learnt a lot. I'm sorry we didn't get to all of the questions that came through, but we will we'll follow up and respond to anything that we didn't cover in the session. But Hector, thanks so much again for your time.
Absolute pleasure. Let's do it again sometime.
Sounds good. All right. Thanks, everyone.